Happy Monday, November 4th. Happy start of the college basketball season. We are finally here. I am Matt Norlander here with the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. We're getting GP Gary Parrish linked up here. Hope he joins in just a moment. But I'll take the reins as we get going here to tip off the season. I tell you, the preseason from my perspective and everyone at cbssports.com, it's about 2 months long between calling coaches, texting, researching, writing, all the preview content. We have a mountain of preseason content that you can read right now at cbssports.com if you need just a little more to get you amped and hyped up. But I'm just always so ready, so eager, so hyped for college basketball. By the time we get to the actual first day of the games, and finally, we are here, and we got a couple of big ones for you tonight. We're going to preview those, talk about those a little later in the show, but it feels amazing. It feels incredible to finally have college basketball back. To me, it feels like, and really it is, the longest offseason of any major American sport for both men's and women's college basketball to finally have games going. They're even playing right now as we talk to you live here on CBS Sports Network. Let's start with some big picture storylines for our audience that's really coming back in and is like, oh yeah, college hoops, it's here. Here are some of the biggest plot points that we're tracking and will probably maintain not just over the course of the next couple of weeks, but over the next few months as we play out this season. I think, to me, the biggest one heading in is going to be UConn and its quest for a three-peat. Think about this offseason. You had Dan Hurley turning down the Lakers in very public fashion, and the fact that he even got the Laker opportunity was a whirlwind unto itself. But UConn had that. Remember, UConn was looking into leaving the Big East to join the Big 12. Ultimately, that never came to be, so UConn stays in the Big East. There's been a lot of, after winning a second straight national championship, there was a lot of noise with the Huskies, and now they bring back Alex Caravan, who's been a 2-year starter, but he's the only familiar face on that roster. But they've got a lot of pieces. They're getting a lot of respect, rightfully so. Dan Hurley kept his entire staff. It's exceedingly rare in college basketball, not just to win 2 national titles, but to do so and not lose any of your assistants, period. So that's a big time development there. I think between UConn and Duke, and Duke and Cooper Flagg, those are the 2 biggest storylines. But to me, it's UConn's chase for a three-peat. It's a preseason top 5 team. It's the favorite in the Big East. Dan Hurley has already found motivation in the fact that his team wasn't picked preseason number 1, but objectively speaking, as GP and I have talked about on the pod numerous times in this preseason, from a roster standpoint, there are a few other schools that are assembled better than UConn. But GP, you tell me. To me, it's UConn is the biggest preseason storyline, then maybe Duke Cooper Flagg. I haven't dove into that just yet, but I think the quest for any team trying to win a 3rd straight title and being a viable candidate going in, I mean, to me, that's clearly the top storyline as we get ready to roll into this season starting this week, GP.
I don't think there's any doubt. By the way, congrats to IU Indianapolis on recording the first victory of the 2024-25 season. That happened this morning in Indianapolis, and it'll probably be the last time we talk about IU Indianapolis on this podcast the rest of the season.
They're no longer IUPUI, so I got an issue. The Ooey Pooey is no longer a thing, so I'm vowing until Ooey Pooey comes back, they can stay the heck off our podcast. That's all I got to say.
I didn't have nothing to do with that. You're clearly right. UConn is the biggest story in the sport, trying to become the first program to three-peat since UCLA did it in the early 70s. And let me bounce this off of you because I've written this a few times, said it a few times. I get some pushback sometimes, but I believe it to be true. Would you be willing to call a UConn three-peat the greatest team achievement in the history of men's college basketball? Because if they do it, I would label it that way.
Yeah, I would. I mean, if they get to that point, I think that is a very viable possibility in the history of college basketball. And frankly, it would rank among the greater achievements we've seen in all of American team sports, considering the environment that we're in right now and the changeover and the very distinct, different cast of characters that would apply. I grew up, I'm still a diehard Chicago Bears fan, but I'm not nearly the Chicago Bulls fan I once was when I grew up. And I invoked the Bulls to say there were 2 different three-peats there, but it was 2 different distinctly cast of characters. But the first 3 years, that was your Paxson and your Horace Grant and your Bill Cartwrights. The ones on the back end, well, that had, obviously Dennis Rodman. It had Bill Wennington, Luke Longley. There were different, that was two different eras, but each of those three-peating teams, the core for the most part stayed consistent. With UConn, that hasn't been the case whatsoever. The group that won in the first year was different from the group that won last year. And now we wait and see if they can do it. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see. In fact, we have a whole big piece on CBSSports.com right now where all of us chipped in on the writing side to offer our biggest storylines, and GP addressed the UConn three-peat angle. One of my angles was, how will Dan Hurley actually handle this? How will he comport himself this year? Because he is on top of the world. He has been told, rightfully so, he's the king of college basketball, and he is a guy who has succeeded at punching up his entire career, and now he's going to be punching for air, because truly the only thing that he has to motivate him right now that is tangible is the fact that his team wasn't unanimously picked to be the preseason #1 team in the country, when there's a very rational argument against that. Even in spite of that, UConn is the overwhelming and unanimous favorite to win the Big East and is almost universally across the board being picked as a preseason top 5 team. They're still getting tremendous amounts of respect. I do think some bumps will come, and how Hurley handles that, I think, is an intriguing subplot to the overall UConn chasing a three-peat storyline.
The entire situation that Dan finds himself in is fascinating to me. This is a guy who has spent almost his entire life as the second best player in his family and the second best coach in his family. And now he's the king of college basketball, undeniably. And just to frame it for you, why I think this would be the greatest accomplishment for any program in the history of Division I men's basketball, it's not that UConn won its first of back-to-back titles in 2022-23, every game in the tournament by double digits. They did it after starting that season unranked in the AP poll. They were not in the top 25, but they were your national champions. That's not normally how this stuff works. Then they lose 3 starters from that team, win another national title, and now they've lost 4 starters from that team and are ranked 3rd in the AP poll and is a co-favorite with Kansas in most betting markets to win the 2025 NCAA tournament. Now, obviously, odds are stacked against them, just like odds are stacked against everybody. The NCAA tournament is weird in the sense that even when you are the favorite to win it, you are not expected to win it. You would always, or certainly almost always, take the field over any one team. So I don't know that I'm ready to predict a UConn national championship for a 3rd straight year, but I'm certainly not eager to bet against it. Somebody's got to win the thing, and nobody's been better in that bracket than them over the past couple of years. Let's transition real quick to what we agree, I think, is the second biggest storyline. If UConn's the biggest team heading into this thing, certainly the biggest player is Cooper Flagg. He was the #1 prospect in the class of 2025 before he reclassified to 2024, immediately shot to the top of those rankings. He is now projected to be the #1 overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. Norlander, I know you went to Durham recently, spent some time with Cooper Flagg. What should fans expect from this 17-year-old who seems likely to be the face of the sport this season?
A lot of high highs, but you know what? As we really gear up for Duke to host Maine tonight, Cooper Flagg being from Maine, that game was intentionally scheduled. And that's a cool little gift for the Flagg family, and we'll see if Maine can keep it close. They actually have a pretty good young coach named Chris Markwood, and Cooper's twin brother, who did not reclassify, Ace Flagg, he will play for Maine next year. He recently announced his commitment there, so that's a pretty big and meaningful matchup for that family tonight. I think we need to brace for the real possibility that Cooper Flagg on some nights will not be Duke's best player or second best player. He is extremely hyped, rightfully so, considered to be the favorite to be the #1 pick in next June's draft. I also sat down with Con Knippel, and Con Knippel, who is a freshman scorer, a very good shooting guard who plays tremendous defense, both team and man-to-man. He might be the one that leads all freshmen and maybe even Duke in scoring. And I think that there's been all this hype around Cooper Flagg, and he's a great defensive player, and he's going to be a very impactful guy. But Duke is so loaded that I think we should get, for the purpose of getting ahead of it and giving our audience a heads up here, there is so much talent. The guard play for Tyrese Proctor on Duke, I talked to John Shire about this. It's paramount to that team's success, maybe even more than whatever Cooper Flagg does. Just be aware of the potential for Flagg to maybe be the best freshman in the country and have some just ridiculous highlights. I think that's coming. But there could be plenty of nights where Duke wins, and it might be because of Tyrese Proctor. the outrageous defensive potential of Kaman Maluach, who's a freshman, big, who's raw, but man, his upside is insane. I think Knippel's impact has Reed Shepherd type potential. And Reed Shepherd was the best freshman in the country last season. So I can't wait to see Cooper Flagg. He's on a star-studded freshman class with 6 highly ranked players. It's been incredible, but I'm not yet sure that he is going to have the all-around impact of, say, a Zion Williamson, who was also on a star-studded freshman class and was truly a do-everything player for that Duke program.
Zion was a statistical monster, like a once-in-a-decade type of guy. Clearly, Wooden Award winner, one of the few freshmen to ever do it. I think if you set the bar at Zion, that's a pretty high bar to reach. But I think he's going to be tremendous. In that season with Zion, this, that was one where R.J. Barrett was the number 1 prospect in the class. Cam Reddish was even ranked higher than Zion, but it became clear pretty quickly that Zion was the best player and prospect at Duke. I've heard some people speculate about that at Duke this year, like, watch out for one of the other freshmen. I don't believe that's going to be the case. When we look up in December, January, February, March, when it's all over, I think not only is Cooper Flagg clearly going to have been the best freshman at Duke, I think he's going to be the best player in the country. I voted him our preseason CBS Sports National Player of the Year. I was outvoted by my colleague, sensibly, Mark Sears. There's nothing idiotic about that. Mark Sears is on a preseason top 5 team, and that run he went on through the NCAA tournament is one of the greatest individual runs in modern NCAA tournament history to take Alabama to its first Final Four. Reasonable minds can disagree, but I think Cooper Flagg's going to be tremendous, and there's a decent chance, he'll make sure the nation is aware of that later on today when, as you noted, plays against his home state of Maine. When we come back, we'll turn our attention to the Big 12. That's where the preseason number 1 team resides, Kansas Jayhawks. There are also 4 other Big 12 schools in the top 10 of the preseason AP poll. This could be the deepest, maybe even the best conference of all time. I'm going to ask Norlander if he thinks that's accurate. We'll do it next. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. The season is now officially underway, and the top-ranked Kansas Jayhawks, they're going to get started tonight against Howard inside Allen Fieldhouse. KU, not only number 1 in the AP poll and coaches poll, also number 1 in my top 25 and 1, which you can find every single morning throughout the season at cbssports.com. But somebody decided they wanted to be different this preseason and not put Kansas number 1. His name's Matt Norlander. Defend yourself.
We went through this a year ago when you also had Kansas preseason number 1. And how'd that work out for you?
I don't remember. I don't live in the past. I
can refresh your memory. Kansas tied for its worst mark ever at KenPom under Bill Self and failed to reach the Sweet 16. Trivia time.
Okay, let's go.
Kansas is preseason number 1 in the AP top 25. It's the
right.
5th time this has happened in program history, all 5 times under Bill Self. That's 4th best ever. Which 3 schools have been preseason number 1 more frequently than Kansas in the AP poll, which dates back in preseason rankings to 1962?
UCLA.
UCLA is 3rd with 8 appearances.
Kentucky.
That is incorrect. Kentucky has not been preseason number 1 as many as 5 times.
Well, then that sounds like somebody's not doing their job there.
Okay, take it up with them.
North Carolina. North Carolina
has the record for most preseason number 1 rankings in AP poll history with 10. You need the number 2 program.
We'll go with the Duke Blue Devils.
Duke is correct. Duke has 9. UNC has 10. UCLA has 8. Kansas now has 5. Kansas has yet to make the Sweet 16 when ranked as a preseason AP number 1. Defend your pick, GP.
They have the best roster in the country as it pertains to building a college basketball team, and one of, if not the best, college basketball coach.
Bill Self, a better coach than Dan Hurley right now. Who are you taking?
I'm not ready to make decisions like that on the Monday of the opening day of the season. But what I will say is that we have voted on this as a panel at CBS Sports for several years now, and Bill Self had won that vote several years in a row. Dan Hurley was the leading vote getter this season, unsurprisingly, after winning back-to-back titles. Listen, you can't argue with the idea that Dan has won back-to-back titles and has a chance to win a third. These are the two men, Dan Hurley and Bill Self, who are the only people in the sport now with multiple national championships. Both have an opportunity, a realistic chance to get their third this season. I mean, I could pick one if you wanted me to. They're both great. I mean, it's 1A, 1B, whatever order.
You've got Kansas number 1. I've got Kansas, oh, by the way, number 3 in the country in the preseason. So it's not like I gave them the Iowa State treatment there whatsoever. KU obviously loaded. They've got a great core back, Hunter Dickinson, DeJuan Harris Jr., who I feel like a year ago I was saying he might be the most underrated point guard, and now he feels even more underrated. He's a pure point guard, a pass first point guard, a really good defensive player, has been a defensive player of the year finalist. KJ Adams back as a true, traditional 4-man. And then they brought in a very highly touted portal class, AJ Storr, Zeke Mayo, obviously well-regarded Ryland Griffin from Kansas, who can really shoot. They're going to be a lot deeper than they were last season. I tell you what, the Big 12 has gone to a 20-game schedule for the first time in its history. This is now a 16-team league, and it should be a tremendous race between KU, Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, and Arizona. 5 of the top 10 teams right there in the AP top 10 heading into the season. GP, I know you think Kansas will win the league. I'm going to take Houston to win the league. Houston is also the preseason number 1 team in every referenced mainstream predictive metric that's out there. Every single one has Houston as the number 1 team in the country. In fact, we talked storylines in the first segment there. I would say Houston has never won a national title. Can they do it this year? Would be up there with some of the biggest storylines, in addition to the Big 12, and we're going to get to the SEC in a second as well. Which league's going to have supremacy? Big 12 has been the best conference in the country for a while here, and now we are in the era of the super conference. How will these conferences bear out over the next four plus months there? It's going to be interesting. I'm wondering from you got Kansas winning the league, 20-game schedule for the first time in conference history. How many wins this gets you the 1 seed in the Big 12 tournament? Is it going to be, do you need 16? Is it going to be as low as, say, 13? I think the low end is 13, and I think I'll be surprised in this just ridiculously stacked league, GP, if any team can win more than 16 regular season conference games. What do you come down at?
I think if you get 15 Big 12 wins, you'll win the league outright. 15-5 would do it. 14-6 might. And the reason isn't just because of the strength at the top, because there's real strength at the top. As you mentioned, they have 5 teams in the top 10 of the AP poll. That's the first time any league has ever done that in a preseason AP poll, have 5 of the top 10. But they also, at KenPom, have 4 of the top 8, 5 of the top 11, 6 of the top 15, 7 of the top 17, 8 of the top 21, and absolutely nobody lower than 89th. So you've got, I think you can reasonably say, at least 5 national championship contenders at the top, and really no garbage at the bottom. This is a theme from Big 12 Media Day in Kansas City. I was there a couple of weeks ago. I talked to Bill Self about it, talked to Kelvin Sampson about it, talked to Scott Drew about it, and they all said, every power conference, you're going to have to go play at Kansas, at Houston, at Duke, at Indiana. Every power conference is going to have real strength at the top. The difference between, say, the Big 12 and literally every other power conference is that there is not a road game in your league where you can play poorly and expect to win, no matter who you are. Even if you are number 1 Kansas, number 4 Houston, however you do it, if you go to Central Florida, you got to play or you'll get caught. Again, nobody outside of the top 90 at KenPom, which is among the reasons. I don't think it's crazy, and different people could define it differently, but this might go down as the best or toughest, however you define that, conference ever. Because you're right, the SEC might end up with more NCAA tournament teams, maybe. We'll get to that next. But I don't think the strength at the top of the SEC matches the strength at the top of the Big 12. And when you realize there's nobody outside of the top 90 in the Big 12, however you slice it up, this is going to be one of the best leagues ever, if not the best league ever.
Houston right now has been ranked for 86 consecutive weeks in the AP rankings. That's the longest streak in the country. The second longest belongs to the Big 12, and Kansas was 65 consecutive weeks ranked in the AP poll. By the way, Iowa State, preseason number 5. That is a program record. Never entered a season with more esteem from the AP voting collective than what they have right now. You said 15-5. My prediction is going to be 14-6 is going to get it done. I think that'll be Houston, and I think there is a better than 50% chance that Kansas ties Houston with the 14-6 mark, and they basically they split at the top of the league standings there. I would put in the tournament going in. We talked about this. We've got a Big 12 preview episode in the podcast feed if you're watching on CBS Sports Network. Thanks for joining us. If you want to dial back and check out some of our preview content, we got so much waiting for you in the podcast feed. Here's who I'd send to the tournament going into the season. I think Houston finishes first in the league, then Kansas, then Baylor's third. Arizona getting into the Big 12 just is the strength of this conference is outrageous. I've got Arizona 4, Iowa State 5, K-State 6. I think they're going to do well with Coleman Hawkins in the transfer portal. Jerome Tang is loaded up. I got Texas Tech 7. Then I've got Cincinnati. The fact that I have Cincinnati 8, and I do think it's within the realm of possibility that Cincinnati, which has such a good core coming back, finishes in the top 5 of the league. It speaks again to the top half of this conference, how good it is. And then I've got UCF. We'll get to them before we're out of this episode here as well. I think UCF will be the surprise team. I think we are near guaranteed to have a surprise Big 12 team really pop up and be a factor. I've got those teams making the tournament, so I guess that's in essence 9 of the 16 teams getting in. It could well be more, but I go those 9 and then draw a line. I think BYU will wind up being one of the first teams left out of the bracket.
Which leads us straight into our next topic, which is the SEC, because when you combine the Big 12 and the SEC, it's not crazy to think those two conferences alone could account for, say, 20, even more than 20 spots in the 2025 NCAA tournament. Evidence being that our colleague and friend Jerry Palm, bracket expert, CBS Sports, currently has 11 SEC teams projected to make the 2025 NCAA tournament. If that happens, it would tie a record previously set by the Big East. We'll get into that next, right after this break. You're watching the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Let's turn our attention to the SEC, where Jerry Palm has 11 schools projected to make the 2025 NCAA tournament. If it were to happen, it would tie a record previously set by the Big East. Norlander, when did you first realize that the SEC might be in a position to send more teams to the 2025 NCAA tournament than anybody else?
Are you talking in the context of this season, GP?
I'm just talking in the context of your life. When did you first know this?
In my life, I don't think I'm there. If it's in my life, I honestly don't think I'm there. 11, I think it's okay. I think 11 is in the realm of possibility. Now, again, we are now in the era of the Super Conference. So you've been following college football. You're all too aware of this. But now the SEC and the Big Ten, those are 18 school leagues. The Big 12, that's a 16 school league. In addition to, the SEC is a 16 school league, and then the ACC is an 18 school conference there. So with more teams in these conferences, they're going to get more schools into the tournament. But 11 is a lot, and the math will math. There will be a lot of teams that take on a lot of losses, and it's going to be a hard needle to thread to get as many as 11 in. It's happened once before in the Big East a decade and a half ago, but I don't think it gets 11. I'll probably get exposed on this come Selection Sunday. I don't think it gets 10. I think it gets half the league in. I think the SEC winds up sending 9 teams to the tournament. And part of this is based on, I still think we're going to get at-large bids for teams outside the high major structure. Like, I still think we're going to get 5 or 6 schools doing that. And if that's the case, I just think it's going to be hard for the SEC to get 11 now. However, Palm's got 11 as we start here. I'd go Alabama, which I have winning the league. By the way, Alabama chasing back-to-back Final Fours, trying to win a national title. That's another huge storyline this season. In fact, as I look at this GP, Alabama, then Tennessee, then Kentucky for me. Kentucky, oh, by the way, is in the preseason poll for the 57th time. That's the most in the history of college basketball. So I go Bama 1, Tennessee 2, Kentucky 3. Then I'll go Florida 4, Arkansas 5. Yet another storyline. Kentucky and Arkansas, how they do in the post-Calipari era. That'll be certainly very intriguing. Auburn, I have 6, which is lower than most. I have Texas 7. And I like all of those 7 teams to comfortably get in and be seeded really, really well. And then I think there might be a little bit of a drop there. I've got A&M 8, and then I've got Georgia, which looks to be really defensively good and has a really notable freshman. Heck, Georgia might have the best freshman in the conference in a league that's not really dominated by a lot of marquee freshmen. I've got Georgia getting there as the 9th team overall. I know you have more than me. Who do you like to be among the best in the conference? And then who do I not have making the tournament that you would that you'd say is really well positioned? I know there's one glaring example of a team that's even in the preseason AP top 25, and I've got that team 10th, but I don't have them making the tournament.
I take great offense on behalf of my home state, the state of Mississippi, as you have left out both the Ole Miss Rebels and Mississippi State Bulldogs. I think both of them are in. I've got Ole Miss 25th in my top 25 and 1. I went and saw them practice last week down in Oxford. That's going to be a really good team. Like, I don't want to speak out of turn, but Chris Beard talked about that Ole Miss team. He said it reminds him of his second team at Texas Tech. And as you know, that second team at Texas Tech surprised a lot of people, and I believe got knocked off maybe by Villanova in the NCAA tournament. Like, he likes his roster. They beat Illinois pretty convincingly in a recent exhibition. I think Ole Miss is safely going to make the NCAA tournament, and I won't be surprised if Mississippi State is there too. I've got 8 SEC teams in my top 25 and 1, but here's the thing. Alabama at number 2, nobody else inside the top 9. So it goes Alabama 2, but then Auburn at number 10, Texas A&M at 11, Arkansas 13, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, and Ole Miss rounding out the order. I say all that to say this. I think it's possible the SEC gets more teams in the NCAA tournament than the Big 12, but I don't think the SEC has as many legitimate national championship contenders as the Big 12 does, at least on paper on day one of the season. We could look up in February and Arkansas looks like the best team in the country, right? We'll see. But just on paper heading into this thing, I think the Big 12 has at least 5 real championship contenders. And in the SEC, I might only go with Alabama.
We'll see. I'll be surprised if the SEC doesn't get a second team into that national title conversation. Let's say when we get going with league play, I think there's going to be at least another team that pops there. Rick Barnes has been so consistently good in the regular season, and his team actually fared well last season, got knocked off by Purdue and Zach Edey. No Dalton Connect. We'll see what happens there. Most fascinating teams in this conference to me are Alabama at number 1, far and away. You've got the Hoops team for only, I believe, the 8th time ever being ranked higher in the preseason than the football team did. And it would be stunning, and you almost never say this either, it would be stunning if Alabama's basketball team wasn't a lot better than its football team this upcoming season. It's not just Sears. They brought in a lot of really good transfers, led, I think, key on the defensive end, Cliff Amori there, Chris Youngblood, who's also a key transfer from South Florida. They've got a lot of guys, and with Nate Oates' offense, they're my preseason number 1 team, and I really like their chances to lord over this league there. So they're fascinating. Everything Mark Pope in Kentucky. Kentucky plays Wright State here to start the season on Monday night. That is the highest over under on the board, 160.5, and that is an indication that Kentucky, which actually was offensively really fun to watch last season under Calipari for the first time in a long time, this group could be even more fun. That's a tremendous storyline than obviously Calipari at Arkansas, what they're going to look like. There's a lot of intrigue there. So there's no shortage of storylines there in the SEC, and the depth seems to be self-evident. But when you have so much perceived top to bottom strength, I think there will be some cannibalism that's unavoidable. And so because of that, I just wonder if we don't get to the first week of March and suddenly there's like this cram, say spots 8 through 13 in the league standings there. And if it gets really, really tight, trying to squeeze in, say, a 10th or 11th team into the bracket.
Opening day in college basketball, there's a lot of games, not a lot of great ones, but a lot of them, just not a lot of great ones. We do got a top 10 matchup today, though. It'll happen 11:30 Eastern, so you'll probably be waking up to the final score if you're a normal American on the East Coast. Still, it is Gonzaga and Baylor, a rematch of the 2021 national title game. We'll dive into that game next. Also, is a ranked team going to lose to an unranked team today at any point? I'll ask Norlander that question as well. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. There is exactly one game between two top 10 teams today. It's number 6 Gonzaga against number 8 Baylor. They're going to do it in downtown Spokane, Washington. 11:30 Eastern tip. Stay up late. These two teams, of course, played in the title game of the 2021 NCAA tournament. Norlander, somebody asked me earlier today, why doesn't college basketball get more high-profile games like this on the opening day of the regular season? If somebody asked you that question, in fact, that's what I'm doing right now, how would you answer?
There you are. It's an easy one to answer here. Too many coaches are insecure about playing a high-profile opponent on the first day of the season, and that is exacerbated by the transfer portal when there is a higher ratio of turnover across the board in the sport than there has ever been before. And so when you have more uncertainty about how good your team will be, how well it can play together, and really how composed it can be on the floor against a potential top 20, top 30, top 40 team, you're going to schedule against that and instead play mid and low majors as a tune-up in the first game, potentially the second game, potentially the third game of the season. And so that effect can really be contagious across the sport. It's unfortunate for the sport. It's unfortunate for fans, but thankfully there are a few coaches who are willing to buck that trend. And specifically, Mark Few and Scott Drew being very good friends and being good friends for a good long while here has played a big role in this. And they intentionally wanted to make sure they played each other. And in fact, this is now going to be a multi-year series. For Gonzaga and Baylor's sake, in the next few seasons, they are going to aim to play each other on the first night of the season, if not night one, opening night, then the second night after that. So we have them to thank, and not just that, GP. It's not just that, okay, we know who Mark Few is. We know who Scott Drew is. These are two coaches that seem well on their way to making the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame after they retire. It's the fact that Gonzaga and Baylor have also been able to maintain what I think is inarguable. These are two of the 10 best programs in college basketball now and over the past half decade, maybe even a little beyond that. And that is a key selling point. It's unfortunate that the game is tipping off so late. We're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but frankly, that is a television decision that the schools had no say in. But that's the reason why. We'd love it if it was a couple hours earlier. It's not, but it is a marquee matchup, and it gives us at least something to talk about. We'll obviously lead on that when we podcast on Tuesday morning. But that's a big reason why we have the arrangement that we have, which is an opening day that is overrun with entirely way too many games with ranked teams playing forgettable mid-major opponents.
It's remarkable, just to double down on the point you made, that these two programs have maintained the level of success they've maintained without exception since playing each other in the title game of the 2021 NCAA tournament. Like Baylor, since then, so they won it in 21. We've had 3 seasons since then. Baylor, 3 straight top 3 finishes in the Big 12. Won the Big 12 in 2022, advanced in the NCAA tournament all 3 years. At KenPom, the past 3 years have finished 4th, 16th, and 15th. They're 11th heading into this season. Gonzaga, on the wrong end of that title game. Since then, 3 straight top 2 finishes in the WCC, including WCC titles in 2022 and 23. Advanced to the Sweet 16 each year. Elite 8 one time. At KenPom, they finished 1st in 2022, 8th in 23, 12th in 24. They're 9th heading into the season. And these are two programs that we think about as real big national brands and powers now. But when Scott Drew took the Baylor job, that was maybe the worst, if not one of the worst, one of the worst, if not the worst, power conference jobs in the sport. He's built it in this. Gonzaga is a small private school in the West Coast Conference. It's never, or any school described that way, is ever supposed to accomplish these things. And so I really do think what I just said plays a role in this game getting made. Who has, we've talked about this before, more job security than Mark Few at Gonzaga or Scott Drew at Baylor? So they can afford to take an early season loss, even an early season beating, and it's like not the end of the world. Their fans aren't going to flip out. There's not going to be a message board post about whether, we can afford a buyout. They don't deal with that kind of pressure because of the stuff that they've accumulated over the decades. And I appreciate them making games like this because I think you're right. Enough people don't do it, largely because they are bark, 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 chick, bark, 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 bark.
I think I got that on my board here.
Are you a
I think
chicken?
are you a chicken? I think that's a familiar drop from one Chris Mack there. Hey, let's pick the game. Since we got it here. Baylor's ranked 8th in the country, Gonzaga 6th. This is not in Gonzaga's campus arena, but it is in their backyard there in Spokane. Baylor famously won easily in the title game in 21. That was the bubble tournament there. Baylor's got Jeremy Roach, a transfer from Duke, Norchad Omier, a big man transfer from Miami. They've got VJ Edgecombe, who could wind up all this Cooper Flagg hype, and rightfully so. Edgecombe could be the highest scoring freshman in the country this season. Keep an eye on him, and I can't wait to see him play against a really legit opponent. Gonzaga, meanwhile, has Graham Ike, could be among the 10 to 15 best bigs in the country this season. Ryan Nembhard, maybe he's one of the most valuable lead guards in his final season of college eligibility. And then a transfer that has a really good shot at being an impact wing, Michael Ajayi, who's a mid-major guy who comes over. He's expected to really make a difference as well. I'll go first. I'm actually going to take Baylor's got a heck of an opening. Scott Drew ain't afraid. He's got this, and then he's got Arkansas in Dallas later this weekend. Okay. You split 1-1, you'll take it. I will go Baylor in this one, GP. Give me Baylor by a couple of buckets. I'll say Bears 84, Zags 80. Hopefully we get a really good one, but give me Scott Drew's guys here to win out. But this one to me feels like a toss-up.
I have Baylor 7th in my top 25 and 1, Gonzaga 8th. So these are comparable teams, at least in my opinion. Put them on a neutral court. I guess I would just respect the top 25 and 1 and take Baylor in downtown Spokane. I'll go with the Zags, and then Baylor bounces back this weekend, gets to 1-1 with a victory over Arkansas. I mentioned there aren't many games between ranked opponents. In fact, that's the one, Gonzaga and Baylor. But there are a lot of ranked teams playing. Will one get upset today by an unranked team? Will a team with a number beside its name lose to a team today without a number beside its name? And okay, who will it be?
Okay, this is going to happen. I'm talking it into existence here, GP, because there's a lot that's likely not going to happen. You got Purdue versus A&M Corpus Christi, Duke playing Maine, Tennessee playing Gardner-Webb, Cincinnati playing Arkansas Pine Bluff, Kentucky playing Wright State, Kansas playing Howard, Houston playing Jackson State, Iowa State playing Mississippi Valley State, Marquette playing Stony Brook, Alabama playing UNC Asheville, Ole Miss playing Long Island, UNC playing Elon, Arizona playing Canisius, and UCLA playing Rider. I think all of those are going to go the way of the ranked team, although for our content purposes, it would be way more interesting if at least one of those teams wound up getting upset on their home floor. I think there are 3 candidates that this apply to. You've got South Florida playing against Florida, and South Florida, we talked about in a recent episode, dealing with the immense tragedy of losing its head coach, Amir Abdur-Rahim, who died just, less than 2 weeks ago out of nowhere. And we continue to send nothing but the best to his family, friends, and loved ones in that program. But he does have that program is a good program. And there's a lot of just weird energy around the game. You just never know how a team's going to respond in that kind of way. I think that one's on the table. I think Ohio State, unranked in the AP poll, playing number 19 Texas in Las Vegas. That game tips off at 10 Eastern. I think that one is a clear pick and a candidate, and there's a good shot there. Those two teams could be top 20 in talent in the country, and yeah, it sounds like a football matchup, but they're pretty good. But the most obvious to me, I'm going to say UCF wins on its home floor, unranked team, and beats 13th ranked Texas A&M on Monday night. Buzz Williams has a good team. Wade Taylor, the 4th among the best scoring guards in the entire country. I credit Buzz Williams for being willing to schedule an opening night game on the road against a power conference opponent. I wish more coaches would do this. This is tremendous from Buzz Williams, but I will say that by the end of the night, he might have a little regret over it. So my pick is UCF over A&M and GP. I'm just going to blindly say, when we talk on the Tuesday morning edition of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, I think we will be talking about 2 ranked teams losing on Monday night to unranked opponents.
I'll go with Ohio State over Texas. I've got Ohio State ranked 15th in the top 25 and one. Maybe I'm too high on them or just high in general, but I like the roster that Jake Diebler put together. I was a little surprised that they didn't get more votes in the preseason AP top 25 poll. So I've got Ohio State over Texas. That's a neutral court game, 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern tip. I think that one's on TNT. Give me the Buckeyes, Jake Diebler's first game in his first full season after replacing Chris Holtmann midseason last season. When we come back, who's going to the Final Four? Who's winning the national championship? I mean, we don't know. Who could know? But we'll answer that question and act like we know. We're going to act like we know. We'll do that next on the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Just a few minutes before we get out of here. You can't have an opening day college basketball podcast without giving some Final Four picks, even a national championship winner. Norlander, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, we do this every year. And by the way, on our Tuesday episode, when we recap all the stuff from Monday, longtime listeners and viewers are aware that we also toss in a number of preseason predictions. We will include those on Tuesday, even though the season has actually started. So I'll have even more goodies waiting for you on the Tuesday AM episode. Let's go Final Four here. GP, now I went more traditional in my picks here than I normally do. And by that, I mean, I picked 4 teams in my general top 8-ish, 9-ish. I usually try and throw in something of a dark horse. I didn't do that this season, although if you want my dark horse, even if you don't, I'm going to give it to you right now. St. John's is my dark horse, but I didn't officially log it there. I'm going to have Houston beating Arizona in the national title game. I think Tommy Lloyd breaks through. He's had a 1 or 2 seed his first 3 seasons with the Wildcats. They get to the championship game, and Arizona makes its first Final Four in 2+ decades. Houston wins its first national championship, and then I'm going to stick with the team I have preseason number 1, Alabama, getting to the Final Four. A side note, we haven't had a preseason number 1 team go on to win the national championship since North Carolina, November of 2008, won the title that season in April of 2009. And then I've got UConn breaking back through, no matter the seed, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 11. I'm going to say Dan Hurley, they get it done, and they make the national semis for a 3rd straight season. So Houston over Arizona with Alabama and UConn all in San Antonio.
As you know, in seasons past, I would always just take the top 4, the top 25 and 1 and say that's my Final Four because logically it just made no sense to me to think somebody other than somebody in your top 4 is going to the Final Four. If that's the case, just put them in your preseason top 4 and look smart come April. So I would always just grab the top 4. Not doing that this year, and it's because of you, Norlander. You've led me to the light by consistently pointing out that the best 4 teams almost never make the Final Four. I decided to take my top 3 and then pull from somewhere else. So I've got Kansas, Houston, Alabama in the Final Four. Those are 1, 2, and 3 in the top 25 and 1. I've got Cooper Flagg and the Duke Blue Devils joining them in San Antonio. Yes, I have Kansas winning the national championship. Bill Self becoming the first active coach to get 3 national titles. And with that, Norlander, before we get out of here, National Player of the Year. I've already said it. I think it'll be Cooper Flagg. That's who I voted for. You're on board with Alabama's Mark Sears. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to take Alabama's Mark Sears to win National Player of the Year. I will also go Cooper Flagg to be the National Freshman of the Year, but I do think that Baylor's VJ Edgecombe has a real shot. I think that Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper at Rutgers are going to be tremendous, but they might cancel each other out. I think the freshmen, ironically enough, are going to have a great season this year and the final COVID year that's filled with a lot of 22, 23, and 24-year-olds in college hoops, GP.
All right, let's go get in front of some televisions. We got a lot of basketball to watch throughout the day. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Terry Teagle, he's a legend. Shouts to Huck Larnell. Thank you guys for once again watching in the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow morning on YouTube. I hope you're there. Till then, take care.